Welcome back, ladies and gentlemen. I hope you enjoyed your lunch. I know I did. So why don't we plunge straight into the first panel for the afternoon. Out with the old, in with the new. And customer experience through new age workplace design and alternate workplace strategies. That's what our next panel will be discussing threadbare. Moderating this panel, the Director, DLF Offices, DLF Cybercity Developers Limited, Mr. Amit Grover, MRICS. Welcome, sir. Joining our moderator on this panel are, first of all, Executive Director and COO, Nitish Estates Limited, Mr. Ashwini Kumar, MRICS. Mr. Joe Verghese, FRICS, Managing Director, Colliers International. Mr. Ram Chandnani, MRICS, Managing Director, Advisory and Transaction Services, India, CBRE South Asia Private Limited. Mr. Jaggi Marwaha of WeWork India. Mr. Amit Ramani, founder and CEO, AWFIS Space Solutions Private Limited. I hope I got that right. And filling up the final chair, Mr. Siddharth Menda, CEO, Coworks. I now hand the floor over to Mr. Grover, who will take us through the next 1 hour.
Thank you. It's been great. I think it's a post-lunch session, so we'll make it interesting so as to keep everyone awake. And we have a great panel around. You know, you got the best spokesperson from the industry in a perfect balance. We've got Ram and Joe from representing CBRE and Colliers heads respectively as the consultants and representing the occupier market, primarily the consultants and the global trends, what the occupiers are looking at. We've got, Jaggi, which is mostly, we got the major, one of the shortlisted criteria was that who's the person who's mostly reported in media these days, and that got Jaggi on board. And then obviously, from the co-working, panel, we got Amit here, and and then Mr. Mendes. So Siddharth will bring in a perfect area, and then my co-colleague, Ashwini from Nitish. So we are the conventional developers, we've got modern new age developers, and we've got the consultants telling us what is the way forward. So interesting panel. Look forward to having a great session, discussions, and equally good questions and interaction. So let me start with just setting a context, and I was just talking with my colleagues just before this area. So one of the slides which I saw some time back, it was about a month back or something, and this is done by BCG, so we can trust them on some of the data points. It is a survey of satisfaction index, which they did it for US and Europe. And interestingly, as you can see on the slide, on last 2 decades or so, there is a gradual decline in the satisfaction index at work. And that made me wondering, why, and as a group we'll deliberate a bit and why something like that is happening in the world, which we thought it's the other way. And then there was another index which in the BCG report was presented, which is a declining productivity trend across countries, and I think they covered US, Japan, Germany, and France. But what was common is there is a gradual declining productivity trend, and that was something interesting which we thought is worth looking at. So on one side, you have that as a data point across last 2 decades in some fashion. And on the other side is a set of occupants who eventually hire spaces they're trying to achieve the productivity the other way, is what the expectation is. And there's another trend which we are expecting, which is there, the global trend, that earlier if you see a conventional org charts, it used to be more top-down, hierarchical. Whereas in the newer world, it is, besides the hierarchical, is the literal collaboration or the engagement or the cooperation at work, which is increasingly encouraged, and that is seen as a driving the productivity parameter. So these are some of the broader thoughts which we thought we'll put it at the panel and the respective works which we do. What is it that we are doing? Linked with that, in one of my last visit to California, I kind of thought of picking up a few data points. One of the interesting things which came up when I walked up to the Facebook campus, this is where Mr. Narendra Modi went in, so I felt a bit of high that we kind of went into the same place. One of the interesting things which I picked up is how some of the international campuses are designed right from the planning stage, that even a building block of a Facebook campus is designed something like this, that they talk to each other. And that was an interesting thought, because how does a base building campus is designed, which is encouraging collaboration and driving collaboration right at the design level. The interesting thing which I picked up from a Facebook campus, there was a staircase or a kind of a bridge kind of a thing which was connecting the block. And I asked the real estate head, so what's the rationale of this? Is it just a 2-story building, people can take stairs? And he mentioned that there is a psychological study which has been done by Facebook, and they figured out the visual appearance of the bridges encourages collaboration. And that was an interesting data point, which said, okay, the architecture is taking that deep dive in really understanding psychology, and are actually delivering that. And another interesting point which the facility head there shared is each of them in these campuses are given some of those access cards, and some of the companies are able to record that whether you're spending more time with the teams or are you spending more time with your co-colleagues. So that's, in a way, in your appraisals, the HR give feedback that, are you more collaborative or are you more authoritative or a single team driver? But these are the thought points of what the organizations are looking at. Kept me thinking that what is it as the developers and the ecospace creators, what is it that we need to do? At the end of the day, the kind of more collaborative spaces, more open spaces is what the occupiers are looking for. They're also driving a lot of sustainability initiatives. I mean, this is just a photograph of a couple of Teslas, which has a charging point at in the campuses, and then the free parking slots allotted to the cars which come on, which are using the battery cars, which is very interesting. I think I saw the first thing here in SAP in Bangalore about 5 years back, and I was told that in a SAP campus in Bangalore, if you drive a battery-operated car, your car parking space is free. So, but that's something which SAP can do as a captive campus, but are something like developers encouraging something like that. What is it that the design patterns are doing which is taking care of connecting the community spaces or workplaces? So that's something, if there is, architects, are the architects doing something different? Are the developers briefed to the architects doing something different? Maybe making a road today, does the road includes a cycle path or a jogging path, or is the same conventional brief which we were doing many years back? So these are some of the thoughts, and likewise, the interior trends are changing, that there are no more conventional boring offices. There are nice workspaces, very highly colorful, very highly collaborative. They are designed to connect people at work, etc. There's technology which is getting implemented across workspaces. This is just a photograph of one of the parking lots in China in one of the recent towers. And sustainability at workspace is something very interesting. I picked up this interesting slide at San Francisco, and it is a real-time dashboard of a building, which is defining the two graphs which you see there. It's saying the power consumed and power generated. So the target which this building has taken is that whatever the power consumption the development will do, they will make sure they kind of generate the same. And that's through solar panel and a combination of solar and wind. So that's just very highly motivating that they were doing a daily power and generation consumption pattern, and they were actually measuring it over a quarter or a week and etc. These are some of the very interesting trends. Back in India, not that because I work with DLF, one of the big change which we have seen is the cyber hub, creating collaborative and the open spaces to a different scale. I don't know if you've seen a photograph like this, this is Cyber Hub on a particular event day with over 25,000 people coming in here. So that this is very much part of the business district. So these are some of the things back home which are really changing of how kind of we're doing collaborative workspaces, managing safety, security, sustainability, and all that. So the question for the panel on a macro specific is architecture delivering something for a work-life balance? Are the buildings responding to employee collaboration needs? Are the buildings delivering happiness and well-being at the areas? Is safety a responsibility? That's something we can talk about. What are the new technology trends? And I think that's something which was mentioned by my colleagues here. Sustainability, is that what we are taking care at the design and operation stage can be talked about? Is social media changing? And above all, the co-working space environment, what is it that's changing? So let me start by putting it, and the last if we can talk about artificial intelligence. That's the term which we heard from Srini a lot more as an occupier in the morning. What is it that our developers are doing? We're hearing that artificial intelligence is going to impact us or impact our occupiers. What is it that's what we are doing about it? What are our thought processes around? So that's, I thought, will be the broader context. So let me start by, asking Ram. Ram, you represent some of the global best occupants, and more so the real big guys who are the kind of, who are defining trends, the Google and the Facebooks and others. What is it that you're hearing that developers needs to know, in their design and development process?
I think that the trend is dramatically changing, obviously, where the occupiers use space. There are two ways of looking at it. One, whether they're creating their own environments that they own, or campus environments that they will standalone lease, versus going into a multi-tenanted environment. So the expectations are very different. The businesses that they own, or when they look at space for the businesses that they own or they run, versus even third-party employees who sit within their environment. So different firms have different standards. So obviously going forward, where there's volatility of workforce, which is really going to happen over the next few years, corporate occupiers obviously look at flexibility, and everyone's having workplace strategy as part of their long-term way of life in terms of what they provide within their environment for their employees to work. But I think the bigger challenge today is with what's really happening from a technology transformation perspective with digitalization, AI, on how the occupiers will eventually occupy their space. Obviously, today developers expect locked-in leases because developers are expecting to go and raise further capital by securitizing their rentals. So that's another question. So are the developers going to be ready eventually to provide you no lock-in leases, fully fitted out, cost of capital for you versus, for a developer versus an occupier? An American corporate is very different. They probably can get capital at 3-4%, where you'll say, I have to borrow money at 14%, why will I invest money on my fit-outs? So these are actually changes that are happening in India. I mean, globally, the US has already matured. A lot of co-working environments have been created, and large corporate occupiers who want that flexible environment will operate from that co-working environment. They can lease a desk, they can for a week, for a day, for a month, for a year. Different pricing modules, and that's what occupiers want, that flexibility, who aren't working in that environment. On the other hand, you see Google, Facebook, all of them building their own campuses where they've owned those, they've bought that real estate. I mean, look at Apple's campus, the kind of money they've invested in that new campus. So obviously creating their own identity is very important, creating that own environment for their employees, because they want to make sure that they want to be the occupier or the business of choice to attract the best talent to come and work for them. So they want to create their own identity, their own environment, where they want to attract the right talent to come and work for them.
Thank you. That's that's great. I mean, let me get to Joe, and let me put up interesting perspective. And thanks for giving choice. I was hearing from one of our clients the other day, who's who used to pitch the outsource business, and I asked him that, what change are you seeing? He said, earlier, when you used to pitch the outsourcing business, we would say, okay, this is the business which we want to get to India. This is the number of people we'll do, and this is how we'll bring in the cost efficiencies. But one of the interesting change what's happening in the new outsourcing pitching is, he said, this is a business, this much human resources you will do, and then this much of robots which will do, or artificial intelligence. So the pitch or a RFP today in a matured outsourcing world is going as a combination of whether you call it artificial intelligence or robots, plus the human capital together. So I'm wondering, taking a note from you, is that you see, Joe, that the future for developers will be an RFP which will say certain square footage of a fixed space and a certain square footage has to be taken from Jaggi as a co-working space as a combination?
Yeah, I actually think that that will become a norm, primarily because, and I'm being aggressively or futuristic over here, but basically, I think it's important not to generalize. One is the few things that you got to realize when you look at the requirement for space is, why is the space required? Is it for a knowledge worker, which is a worker who is going to create value which didn't exist before, which is what startups are doing, which is what people in the R&D centers are doing, versus someone who is doing a straitjacket job, right? And the space requirements for both are very different. So for a banking sector, they probably won't go into a co-working space very soon, because you really don't want your worker, your employee in banking to think very creatively. That could create a lot of problems. But if you're in the startup space, if you're in the R&D space, co-working makes sense. So it boils down to the kind of work you are really doing. And I just want to take a point from what Ram made. I think one of the biggest changes we are seeing is that the decision making has moved from, for real estate space, has moved from top management and real estate executives to the actual end users, right? They are now talking. And real estate and how you position your real estate as an occupier is now a strategic advantage, right? And so what is going to happen in the future, the way I see the future, is that employees will be able to choose what kind of space they want to work in. And I don't think developers are adaptive enough right now for it, but they'll need to become extremely adaptive to meet the requirements of the end users. Yeah.
I'd just like to butt in here. He just mentioned that the bankers won't like to work in a co-working environment. What I represent, WeWork, which is the largest community office space provider in the world. Very different thought, very, very, disruptive is the right word today. And quite clearly, I think the new age office is all about collaboration, community, very deep friendship amongst clients and co-workers in the environment. And just to clarify what Joe said, WeWork has the largest occupier in a building in Hong Kong where 600 HSBC bankers sit. And that's the new age. The new age is because people don't want to be in their own captive campuses. They don't want to work with blinkers on. They want to come out, collaborate, know what the small startup is doing, how the data is changing their lives, how deep collaboration amongst not only their industry, but ancillary industries. A chartered accountant needs a lawyer support, a lawyer needs a banker's, investment banker support, an investment banker needs a marketing agent support, a marketing agent needs a brand or a web developer support, a web developer needs a data analytics support. That's the real world of people, of community, co-working. And I think that's what is changing the world. Today, many of all of you sitting in this room, 5 years ago never used an Uber. I think the times have changed. Today, none of us sitting here will shy away from taking an Uber after drinking at night. And I think that's the flexibility that Ram spoke about, that companies like WeWork will change the way people work forever. I think that's the real radical thought that many companies today have started talking in terms of how co-working spaces can actually change, the entire office segment of the market. And that's what.
I think I'd like to second Jaggi on that. Today, in CoWorks, about 35% of our members are large enterprise, Fortune 500s in fact, and more than half of them come from banking and financial services. Joe spoke about the end users. If you look at the end users today, Amit put up a slide earlier and that spoke about how productivity is going down and about how engagement is reducing. And you actually look at the end user, you look at the workforce is dominated by millennials today. Millennials are digital natives. We did not know a time before the internet. We've grown up with social media. We today share our entire lives on social media, right? You can't take millennials, put them in traditional work settings, put them behind a cubicle and isolate them from the world. All they know is community. All they know is collaboration. All they know is to share, to work with different people from different industries, as Jaggi said. So, which is why co-working is flourishing. It's because of the millennial generation and their values, their beliefs. When they come into a co-works, everybody that they're surrounded by has the same ideologies. They have the same way of thinking about work. They want to do work that they're passionate about, work that has purpose, that has meaning. Jaggi, you're welcome to jump in here as well. This is a generation that is not going, they're known to jump 6 to 7 jobs before the age of 30. Only because they're in search of what they truly want to do.
So they're in search for do what you love. That's the WeWork line, and I'll explain to you what it is. The do what you love line is basically constituting 57% of WeWork members do business amongst the WeWork members. They don't go outside the domain. And that is a very large population of people who are hungry, who are growing the business within the whole environment.
Is that tagline proprietary, Jaggi?
Sorry?
Is that tagline proprietary? Because last time I met you, I used it on my
Do what you
blog.
love. This is what WeWork is all about. Do what you love. And that's your first slide. Your first slide talked about how people are not engaged and happy at work. If you aren't happy at work, you can't be productive at work. If you're not productive at work, you can't grow in life.
Absolutely. And in fact, that brings me to an interesting dimension that interestingly, the WeWork and CoWorks, what they're bringing, and same as the Facebook, is getting much deeper to understanding the human psychology. Let me give you an illustration. When I was last on the San Francisco tour, one thing which was very consistent with all new offices, they're doing without false ceiling, right? So I saw the Google campus, Facebook, LinkedIn, a couple of others, there, and I asked the question that, is it a fad or is it going to stay? And I did visited 2-3 new startups as well, and the answer someone gave me, and actually it was consistent, that for the new age workspace, you want to give them an experience or a feeling that you are in WIP. You're not reached there. And interestingly now, most architects today charge more to give an unfinished feeling than a finished feeling. So let me bring in, Amit here on this. Amit, the big question is that while, you have been, looking out for spaces for last 3 years or so in the market, and you were almost among the first Indian player. And the largest. Of course, there. And although the media coverage is more with others these days. In your experience, when you were explaining the concept, and you were the first ones to even talk about it, I remember meeting you first time 3 years back. Is there a trend changing? Are developers now thinking of creating those niches in the buildings which are designed at the design stage itself, that these are the places for co-working, or is just incidental and you have to work around a lot?
So obviously the developers have not changed, right? Obviously their buildings are designed the similar way that they've been designing for the last 25, 30 years. What's changed is the attitude towards, looking at opportunities beyond doing a straight lease, right? So today we operate about 7,500 seats across 21 centers. Half of those centers are done in partnership with landlords, right? And going forward, every single new office that we open will be in partnership with the developer. Because the reality is, if you want to be the Uber, right, you have to look at the underutilized asset. And every, whatever we might say, out of the 500 million square feet, there's 20% vacancy across India. And if you look at the total number of white-collar workers in India, it's 130 million, right? So there's the 800 million deficit, and still there's vacancy. Now the reality today is that the strata leasing, right, was something that the developer community completely missed, right? And that's where we came in. You know, any center that is more than 90 days of vintage is 100% full, right? So it's not that the demand doesn't exist. Demand existed. The developer community never changed their approach, right? And today with the 21 and with going to about 80 centers, so every 20 minutes we add a seat, right? Sitting here, you know, we'll have it added 3 seats, right? So the reality is, one, if you want to become an Uber, you have to have a network effect, right? And with about 60 centers by end of this year, we would have that network effect wherein within a 10-minute driving radius across 9 cities or 7 metros, we will have an office location, right? So we firmly believe that, you know, if you are looking at creating a community feeling, you have to have a right size, which we feel is, you know, 350 to 400 seats, unlike some of my other, you know, colleagues which believe a little different strategy. So, you know, our approach has been a little different. And obviously, India is a very different market. People behave very differently. What's happened in the US will take some time to evolve here. And we feel strongly that, you know, the co-working opportunity is not just for, you know, SMEs, not just for startups, it's for SMEs and corporates, and that's what's changed, right? We have a eclectic mix of community wherein 50% are SMEs in our centers, right? And a good mix of startups and corporates. And to Jaggi's point, you know, clearly the financial services or the media or any kind of service industry or any vertical is now coexisting in co-working.
And we're not in a hurry to burn cash. We're not going to burn cash. I think that's the big difference in the co-working spaces. We are going to run frugal companies. We're going to run it with the right nuance of getting the right real estate, also getting deep partnerships like what Amit mentioned. And I think it's time for, it's not such a big gap from your perspective as large developers, as DLF and other developers. You have to take out some quality space that you think can add value to your park, can add value to your building, and can create value to your brand. I think that's the big difference. Today, just to give an example, any of the large corporates, India is going through a huge infrastructure issue. The infrastructure issue is plaguing every IT industry today, sitting especially in Bangalore. You can ask people like Roshan sitting there and all the big boys here, Accenture and SAP, all of them have a minimum travel time of 3 hours for their employees today. Can co-working spaces give them a touchdown office in the CBD of Bangalore, in the CBD of Gurgaon? Why not? And that's the solution that we will bring in. If the big developers don't understand this, I think it's very easy for us to go to the smaller players. It's the same story when Uber wanted to come into India and they wanted big discounts from BMWs. When BMW did not offer them that service, they said, okay, we're going to go to the Nissans and the Altos of the world. And that's exactly what we will be doing if the developers, the large developers, don't understand the power of co-working.
But you know what, Amit, if you can just jump in there as well, it's not just underutilized space that developers are offering. Developers are now coming to co-working operators such as us first and saying, we want you in the building first, we want you as the anchor tenant, right? And this is going to become a trend going forward, because if you think about it, how many of you all drive past so many office buildings every single day? I mean, you don't even notice that they're there. Most of the city does that. Most of the city doesn't even notice that they exist unless they work in that building, right? But the moment co-working space comes in, you have hundreds of thousands of people coming into that building every day just because they're visiting the co-working space. They're coming in there for events, they're coming in there for different opportunities to work with the hundreds of creative entrepreneurial businesses that are working out of these spaces. And as a result, landlords are now realizing that co-working spaces is an opportunity for them to completely revitalize their buildings. We are bringing these buildings to life. And before, they were just, part of the city. Now they're becoming iconic landmarks. They're as important to any micro market as a mall is.
That's why Rajminder left, I think, because he can't sit and negotiate with his son now. The son is a new millennial who's negotiating with his dad for 0 deposits, 10 months rent-free. Right, Siddharth?
Absolutely, that's a good one.
Let me get
Ashwin here. So Ashwin, you've heard the future occupants. I mean, both from whether conventional Google and the Facebooks asking and coming and meeting you for a new set of demands, and the co-working players. So what is it changing at the design level? Is this something that any new buildings which you're doing you've incorporated something at the design level, or there's something which in the existing projects we're kind of trying to revamp something to accommodate this new demand, or rather refresh with this new positive demand coming in?
Yeah. I will go back to the basic stuff and go back to the slide that you started this session with, and it was about productivity. It's really the nature of work which has undergone a very fundamental change, and that is what is driving productivity. If you look at a few decades ago, it was still, time and motion study. Mr. Frederick Taylor, his name and his face comes to the fore when you talk about time and motion study. But now it's a lot more about creativity. It's a lot about ideation. It's a lot about innovation. And that happens only when people talk to each other, when people meet each other. There was a recent study which I had come across, and that spoke of innovation getting sparked when people collide into each other. The word collide actually is the one which was used in that report, but what they meant is chance encounters with people. And this is exactly the phenomena that is being tried to be created in a in a Facebook kind of a setup, where it is possible for different people to bump into each other, to work beside each other, and exchange ideas, which ultimately results in innovation. The other is the behavioral aspect, which is, I think, what is really talking of the spaces which Jaggi spoke of, which Bender spoke of. And this is obviously, while you are saying that it is going to be, there are bankers, 500 seats also coming in. But probably for quite some time, it's really going to be the small and medium enterprises, which is going to happen there. It is still, I would say, the kind of an tip of the iceberg. How large it will grow into, very difficult to say. And therefore, a developer would like to actually place safer bets.
So I'll give you some interesting statistics before we got into this business. India's 86 million people work in white-collar jobs in India. 57 million people work in public sector jobs. Out of the 57 million, after you minus 86 to 57, whatever is left is the real white-collar private sector jobs. If you take out the SMEs, the startups and all of it, and take only the 4 or 5 cities in India, we're talking a TAM of about 15 million people who will like to work in an environment which is collaborative, community, and more importantly, cohesive. I think the opportunity is huge, and 15 million people translates to some crazy number when you multiply your square footage of 1:100. And just to let all of you know, from 200 square feet per person in 2008 and pre-GFC model, we have come down to 100 square feet. Today, co-working offers you 60 to 70 square feet per person, and that is more than sufficient, because an average person sitting in a co-working space, especially in WeWork, and we have done that study, only spends 30% of his time in his desk. 70% of his time is actually all about collaboration, walking around his office. So that's the 30%. It's the real me space that you need. Rest is all we space.
Right, understood.
And
Great.
Sorry, Amit. Adding to that as well, if you look at the millennial generation, 4 out of 5 millennials think that their productivity has gone up 67% just working out of a co-working space. Right? So again, this is something this is why large enterprises are now paying attention. This is why they're now rethinking their real estate strategy, and they all are actually saying that, yes, we need to have a certain percentage of our real estate footprint within a co-works. And this is going to be the way forward, and it's going to be led by occupiers now embracing this.
And frankly, Siddharth, your voice is very, very relevant to the developers because you're wearing both the hats. So, for whenever we design an office building, it has a life of 60 years, right? And the life of the trends of late has not been that long. So if you were to now, wearing a user hat, has to design the next building as a provider hat, what change would you give to your architect That's one question. The second is, do you think the Indian architects have the ability to understand these new trends, or does it have to be international architects to live up to these aspirations?
So let me tell you how we do it. We have our own in-house design team. For us, the authenticity of what we stand for, what our mission is very important to us. So it's not only that we do our interior design or architecture in-house, we do everything from marketing to art to literally the entire, we don't outsource anything. And that's a change that you're going to see as well. You're going to see that what you initially used to outsource, people will start to take that over. And coming back to your previous question, going forward, you're going to see architects realizing that co-working spaces, these high-energy entrepreneurial ecosystems, they're going to become the soul of a lot of office buildings. So they're going to start with that, start to understand the people that actually use these spaces, understand what is important to them, what drives them. Today, you come into any one of our spaces, and I'm sure Amit and Jaggi will back me up on this as well. You're going to see people that start to collaborate because they're playing foosball together. You're going to see that there's a venture capitalist that's taking a 10-minute break from his meeting, and he sees that there's a Zumba session going on outside, and he jumps into it just to check it out and see what it's all about. And then he meets his next target company out there. So it's very important to start with that. Start with the people.
So
Understand
next
the people that are
to million
using the
square feet which you will design, how much space would you keep for co-working?
We do about 8 to 10% of all our buildings. So in 10 million square feet, we'll do a million square feet.
And
Give us the rest. We'll take it. Okay. So just to add to the architecture side, it's extremely important that people realize that nobody wants to sit in those large, humongous floor plates anymore. So architects who are sitting here who are designing buildings of the future and developers, keep in mind, everybody wants their share of natural light. Everybody wants their share of lung space. Extremely important. And the buildings of the future will typically be buildings that breathe fresh air, natural light, because everything about the future workspace is all about making people feel that they are at home. Because if you're not at home, you won't love what you do.
Absolutely.
If you don't love what you do, you won't be productive.
Sustainability has become a common denominator. And that's something which has been well understood, well spoken, and whether it's the developer or the occupier or anyone, I think they're, today, at least in this age, people are fairly wedded to this.
It's interesting. Let me bring Ram and Joe back in the discussion. I mean, when we all started our careers,
There's no doubt in this panel who represents the new millennium, right?
Absolutely, yeah.
You're a classic, right?
So I was wondering if 10% is what you would design for next million and Jaggi takes the rest, so what will happen to the conventional occupiers? So where would they go?
So, Amit, the reality is that, everything will coexist, right? It's not that companies are going to give up their HQs and are going to move completely into a co-working environment, right? Just like in the US, if you go today, Microsoft still has its campus, right, or Facebook, and they take space in co-working because that's convenient, because it provides them the ability to use it when they want it, right? And that flexibility is important. Other part on this is the work-life balance. I think work-life will become one, right? So life and work, the boundaries of 9 to 5 will go away. Moment they go away, you need solutions which are much closer to your house, which are much more adaptable and flexible. So I think that's what co-working does. So it's not, I don't think anybody is saying here that it's going to wipe out the complete conventional office user. They will coexist forever.
No, interesting, and let me get back to Ram. I think we've this discussion itself giving us a new dimension to how we approach the industry. I said once we all started our careers, we always used to do those graphs between option A to B, those bar charts which will compare efficiency on carpet area and all that, and net dollar per square feet versions. I think increasingly what's working out is a comparison on productivity per square feet, right? So, Ram, how do you see this trend taking further? I mean, with your clients, would you be recommending or advising as we go further on productivity per square feet? Or does it mean the new concept which are working on workplace strategies and others? Are there something like psychologists getting inducted as part of the consulting? Are there architects who are kind of joining hands as part of advisors? The occupier expectations are completely different. Is there a HR head or HR representative will be part of your team and who'll do an employee survey and will plug it in the advisory?
I think the key is how early on we get into advising our occupier clients, right? I mean, you're involved with their strategy up front. Different clients have different requirements. And talking about the evolution of real estate, when someone mentioned about strata site, Amit, I think you mentioned about strata sale buildings. Obviously, the funding mechanism was very different then, right? 20 plus years ago, a developer partnered on a piece of land. He went to 50 of his friends and said, I'm putting up a building, would you want 1,000, 5,000 square feet or 10,000 square feet? And he pre-sold space to investors. Obviously, that evolution's changed with funding mechanisms come into play in the real estate sector. That's obviously changing where developers are now saying we don't have to strata sell space, we're going to hold back our assets and create value out of it. They see value out of the REITs opening up. They see an opportunity of holding on to their assets and rather selling it off. So obviously the evolution of real estate has dramatically changed the last 20 years. Talking about co-working environments, there are occupier clients, there are those smaller enterprises, those individuals, those startup environments who don't want to invest their own capital. They rather invest it in their business and not create that infrastructure to run an office, to have a secretarial service, to have a receptionist, to ensure that there's a person serving them tea, coffee. They want to get into an environment where everything's taken care of. On the other hand, how many of you will remember that if there was a large occupier who wanted a $500,000 consolidation or 200,000 expansion, he would go to a developer and say, can you offer me incubation space? So now the opportunity is the developers will also want to say that, hey, hang on a minute, we don't have to invest our capital. We can get you incubation space at Coworks, WeWorks, anywhere else in the world, right? I mean, in India. So they're catering to that sector. So one is the entrepreneurial startup ecosystem, which does not want to create that infrastructure and that platform and wants to grow off from a co-working environment. The second is the occupiers who want that incremental space within an environment that before their own space gets ready. So they would go and take up space within a co-working environment. Maybe the developer partner who's giving them a longer term solution doesn't have a short term fix, and they would go land up taking seats for 6 months, 1 year, depending on whether they're signing a build to suit or an under construction building. The third is where companies are very clearly focused on saying, we want to make sure that part of our business doesn't have to operate within our own environment, and we want to go and take space within a co-working environment. So we're catering to different set of occupiers who will want to look at this opportunity and take this opportunity forward.
Excellent. Joe, let me take your perspective to a different level as experience which we've kind of brought in at the expectations, and you had all businesses including the facility management and asset management perspective. Do you think this new expectations would bring in a new set of delivery mechanism also at the overall asset and facility management as a whole? And I know Colliers has some excellent tools on cloud-based management stuff. So is that kind of software or technology reflecting this changing expectations?
Before Jaggi grabs my mic, and before we go to the levels you spoke about, there's quite an interesting discussion over here, and I just want to make a couple of observations. It is very interesting to note, the co-working team passionately build the case for co-working when we are all converts. I don't think any of us are debating that co-working is going to play a very big role in occupancy in the future. I mean, tenants are going to take some portion of co-working. So it's a bit like, the way I'll answer that question is, just because Uber is coming, for some time it doesn't mean I'm going to sell my car and only go by Uber. I will use Uber when it's convenient, and I'll use my car also when I need to. So I think that will be the gradual change. Coming back to your question, Amit, change is inevitable, and this is the evolution that you're seeing. So gone are the days where a tenant or CRE professional or an end user doesn't have a choice. Today, and that's the true reflection of the millennium age. They want choices. They don't want to be stuck with a choice they made for 10 years. So your 10-year leases might be there for some type of jobs. And I'll come back to the point I made about financial sector because both Siddharth and Jaggi jumped on it. So I'll just come back to that. But there will be those 10-year leases. They won't go away because there will be jobs that have to be secured for a long time. And there will be corporate offices. And, even in financial services, there will be co-working occupants that take up co-working, especially like the fintech startup we spoke about, or in the case of HSBC, where they're doing new product development versus, if they were signing vouchers or clearing checks, which has to be done in a very secure environment, which cannot be done in an open environment like that. So there will be jobs. So it comes back to the point I made initially. We cannot make a generic statement about this. You have to go down to what are the jobs all about. And I'll just make one last point. I think it comes back to what you started with. I think the biggest challenge in this working environment is that a lot of jobs with artificial intelligence, with bots, a lot of jobs will disappear. And a lot of the jobs that will be jobs of the future, which is the knowledge workers' jobs, they will want co-working type of environment, whether it is provided by people like WeWorks or CoWorks or by developers themselves. And that could be an adaptation that developers go through. It will be a requirement for the future.
So, sure. Sure, go
I
ahead.
just want to add, there was a discussion about non-utilized space trying to be offered for co-working spaces. And I think Jaggi and Siddharth made a point. A lot of times we've seen some of the B-grade buildings, C-grade buildings that have lied vacant in most cities get offered as the first option, where the developer is struggling to find a tenant, saying we'll offer it on a flexible lease, we'll offer it on a shorter term lease, and willing to give you whatever commercial terms you want. And you will see a lot of them being converted to some of these environments, the co-working environments. But the key is how many developers will eventually create grade A office space to create co-working environments. And that's the game changer. No doubt, while some of them ramp up across India, they will have to go and lease space because there are no developers necessarily giving them ready to move in supply, or the supply is not yet available for them, and they will have to pre-commit to some of the supply in the future to create those environments up front, where developers will want to have a co-working environment to make sure they are an anchor, as you mentioned, Siddharth. But for them to start business, they will have no choice but to go into some strata environments, to some B-grade environments, or maybe upper floor of a retail mall. I just wanted to make that point.
If any business today in the world has to survive, it has to give a solution. If the business cannot be a solution provider, it will not be in business. You take the case of your e-commerce business. If they don't give you the convenience, they're out of business. So I think from our perspective, the biggest problem solving that co-working is giving to our Indian, occupiers is basically that we are problem solving their dependence on, going to developers, negotiating 10-year contracts, paying 5-year lock-ins, paying 10 months deposits, putting investment on the office space rather than investing in their own businesses. I think that's the key. Because if what WeWork does is basically energize those small startups, those small entrepreneurs who cannot afford an office space. I think that's the key that WeWork will bring to India. I think that's why we say we're going to change the way people work in India, because if you cannot, reach out to the cross section of the mass people in this country with a solution, we will not be in business. So that's the big.
Great, yeah. I mean, you did sign the no publicity contract before stepping in, right? Yeah. Yeah, but I think, good. I think it's been an excellent discussion. I'm just conscious of the time, and we'll make it more interactive with some questions.
Amit, maybe you want to touch upon technology
Yes,
transformation
absolutely.
in these
In
environments.
fact, one of the last closing point I want to touch about, we've heard about a lot about artificial intelligence and technology in our business. So as leaders, and so you can start by just telling us that, are you in, what new technology are you inducting at the development stage and design stage so as to connect with an occupant? And the reason I asked this question, the history has been that if at times developer has done something, it's not connecting with the occupant, right? If an access control someone puts in, the occupant says my access control is on a different platform, so they don't talk to each other, and as a result, we always kind of keep the flaps down, and it's the same guard who's sitting there. So what is it that what is the learning curve, what is the research we are doing, and how we are adapting to this technology? I mean, that's one aspect. And then if you can talk about the facility management and you and Siddharth on the developer side, to handle the occupants of Jaggi and the Millennium, do the guards of the future needs to be in a Levi's jeans at the entrance and not those conventional areas? So that's something we have to talk about. So.
As far as technology is concerned, it does give you the ability to be connected with the problem as and where it is. So firstly, obviously, I would talk of, there are two aspects. One is in terms of when we are creating the places. One aspect is that you look at it from the point of view of sustainability. And at the end of the day, sustainability is about really using the least number of resources. So that, as I said, is the base. The second is about automation. And automation not in silos, but it has to be interconnected so that the end user, he can log in his complaint and it can be resolved, a feedback can be obtained that yes, the resolution has happened, whatever be the nature of the problem.
Good.
So that interconnection is something which
it's an interesting question. Is any of the, as a developer, are you managing the social media or a Facebook page to take your decisions of what are the improvements to be done at the building or the workplace level?
So look, social media is only an opportunity or a platform to engage with people. But I'll speak on the developer side and then talk about CoWorks as well. On the developer side, if you think about it, within our portfolio, there's about 2.5 lakh people working across different RMZ properties across the entire country. And they're all disconnected. They all don't know each other. So a couple of months ago, we released a platform. It's a platform called Wired, where all the different users of our spaces across the country are now on the same platform. And we've seen incredible things happen. We've seen a bunch of guys that are incredible, they're movie buffs. So all of them get together on these forums on our own platform. They're now discussing the new upcoming movie, and whoever's in the same city, they all get together, go for the movies, they have these meetings. There's another bunch of guys that are into running. They're very active. So there's people now from different campuses that have gotten together, and they all went to go out together for a triathlon. And because now we're using technology to connect people. We're using technology to find out what they're interested in, what really matters to these people, and how can we connect them with other people that are interested in the same thing? How can we create meaningful relationships, meaningful connections between the people in these spaces?
Right.
So,
Ram, one last word. Sorry, I'm just conscious of the time. One last word on the technology. What is it that your customers are expecting on artificial media? Artificial intelligence. Are they expecting you as consultant to bring in artificial intelligence somewhere?
Absolutely. When we manage buildings on behalf of developers and facilities on behalf of occupiers, they expect us to put in the technology. Obviously, depending on what the building management system is available, what is provided within the environment that you manage is very important. Whether we enhance it, how do we cater to, one, when you're managing buildings on behalf of developers like yourselves, versus an occupant who is where we do facilities management. And the new mantra on facilities management is the vested model, which is not an outsourced model. So the model is changing dramatically.
Right.
We can have a longer discussion on the vested model.
Yeah. No, interesting, and we won't go that far. One last word as a key takeaway for the audience, Amit, on that future trends. Is
So
it going to stay?
I think what will happen is that the co-working will allow us to experiment with newer ways of working, right? I mean, we continue to adapt our products that we put in there. Because we have that kind of a base of people, 5,000 strong community, all growing very, very fast, we are able to adapt, right? I think co-working will learn from the conventional office guys, and the conventional office guys will learn from co-working. So I think both will enhance the whole experience of way people work, and the future will, both will coexist as we see.
Jaggi, key takeaway for developers. Do you want the guards to be in the Levi's jeans?
Wake up and smell the coffee. It's really changing. And only when you go outside, then you'll see how people are adapting. I think it's not only developers, but also large companies. One last anecdote. Nike, you can't have a much more cooler company than Nike. Nike's actually asked WeWork to build a WeWork inside the Nike campus in Portland. Now, that's the change of the future. Because people want, a cool company like Nike also wants to make their places more cooler. I think it's very clear that if you can't move in that direction, you will not be able to engage your employees, and you'll not be able to get productivity up there.
Do you want the conventional slabs and columns to be there? Last time we just completed a building, so we just
Quite
finished
clearly,
and inaugurated.
if you give me a flat slab, you give me 4.2 meters, you give me non-undulated floors on 0.2 level difference between one floor level, I'll love that.
So key takeaway-
give me natural light through the windows, give me full glazing, give me car parking ratio of 50 square meters. Can I go on? I can go on and on.
So it's very important as a key message for all developers in India. Next time you're designing, have a half-an-hour session. We just did a great building. We thought we just inaugurated, and then we invited Jaggi and said, just remove these 3/4 of the walls, and then we're fine. And we had just completed a building. We'll make sure.
Amit and Jaggi, it looks like you guys are trying to do a transaction. Can we help?
Absolutely, absolutely. Jaggi just said.
You're definitely negotiating a transaction.
all consultants have to be also in jeans and t-shirts.
So Amit, if you don't mind, I'll just leave everybody with this final thought. So last week we released an artificial intelligence-based chatbot named Ava, and Ava is now the face of the space. She's the face of the building. So what we've done is, buildings were just space initially, and we've taken this building and given it a personality, given it a front. This building can now converse with you. So let's say you want to book a meeting room. You now just tell Ava, hey, I want to book a meeting room, and she'll reply saying, okay, who else is in the meeting? And she can send emails to other people and collaborate with them and figure out what is the most suitable time for this meeting, book the meeting room, and send a calendar invite out to everybody.
Excellent.
This is done by the building.
Yeah. Oh, excellent. I think that's amazing. That kind of, with that note, I think we'll end the session, which kind of we're conscious of the time, plus we've got some great audience as well. Let me quickly open the floor for a few good questions. We have a few occupants, who may ask a few questions, both from what's expected from the co-working community or from the developer and consultants. That will be interesting. Sure, we have a few hands there. Rajan from EXL.
Thanks, Amit. Amit, my question is related to the technology, to the conventional developers. We were talking about the artificial intelligence coming across all over, but why can't we be able to implement that in your base building design itself? I've seen this across the globe in other places where the building developer used to provide a photo ID access card to the employee. So you are talking about access card is not getting integrated between an occupier and the developer. All that has been rolled out. Okay, the developer gives the card to every occupier, and every occupier register their employees with the developer to ensure the safety and security of the building. Secondly, they don't get into the complication of my card is not getting integrated with your system, or my 5 panels are different, your 5 panels are different. All of that is getting sorted out. I mean, we need to just come out of our regular thinking to go forward.
Right. Excellent, Rajan. I think that's very valid point. And you'll pay the developer for putting extra resources for that, right? But let me ask, Ashwin, would you like to answer that? Because that's a question of the occupier expectation.
No, I think, the co-working space, which was talked of a lot, it's really putting your customer in the center. And the fact is that the older model did not really put the customer or the occupier in the center. And I think the time is still not at a point where we have done the best of the job. And I think we still need to work on it. This is what I would say, yeah.
Absolutely. In fact, and I can add, Rajan, there's no reason that why the office buildings, atriums, and the concierge and the reception should not be able to function at par with what you get at a five-star hotel. I mean, you get the access cards charge, recharge as you check in, check out. You have all the extended services which are provided. It's the same air-conditioned lobby of a similar size like a hotel. I think all these years we've been underutilizing by providing limited services. I mean, it's an underutilization of real estate per se. So I think that's definitely the future. I can tell you about as what we're doing at DLF, and that's the trend internationally as well. A lot of hospitality senior experts are getting inducted in facility management, and that's primarily with the view of experience enhancement, a lot of employee connect which is there. So yeah, sure. Any other questions?
Yeah. I would like to draw a parallel between affordable housing and affordable office complexes, whatever you call as WeWork. India has got 6 lakh villages, making about 60,000 clusters, 4,000 odd cities, 600 district towns, 3 dozen state capitals / union territories. But we are looking mostly at a dozen odd metro or near metro cities. So if you're talking of scaling up this concept, then are we looking at those places also where a lot of the people are migrating into many places, creating slums or slum-like conditions? So they will get opportunities, the jobs will be there, so long as we can take care of the basic infrastructure of power and internet and other connectivities. So do you think that we have some kind of a thought on that we look beyond the places that we are already...
Sure. So Jaggi, do you want to talk about WeLive?
I think it's a very good point, but the thing is, our lifespan is short, and everybody's running for the same goal in terms of maximizing whatever they get in the shortest span of time. And I think anybody who spares 5 minutes of his time with you is actually granting 5 minutes of his life with you. And I think in the short span of whatever time you have, if you can actually capitalize what the market has today in terms of the real quality, the workforce that really needs and understands this concept. And I think with these large 8 cities that we talk about in terms of today a 300 million square feet market is all about 8 or 9 cities in India. I think that itself is a huge opportunity because people from the smaller towns in any case are graduating into the big cities. And the big cities are becoming the central force behind the entire economic growth. As much as you would say that, even in the real estate developers, I still remember RICS had a discussion 4 or 5 years ago, and then that time the flavor was, how do we move to tier 2 cities? Today, tier 2 cities are really not the flavor in terms of where we are, because there's so much opportunity in the big cities. And I think it'll take us a long time to actually graduate to that level, to be really realistic about it.
Right. I think, yeah, sure.
I'll just answer your question. No doubt, they will have no choice but to go to the tier 2 cities, for sure. There is already a serviced office provider, Regis actually, who's present in 50 locations across India. And the occupier demand, if there is demand, they will have to set up centers. The scale of the center would be different. You probably land up with a 20,000 square feet or a 15,000 square feet environment. But there is occupier demand, and I know for a fact that they will tap into that opportunity in a matter of a couple of years. They want to start obviously with the tier 1 cities, but the trend is that they will have to go and cater to the smaller cities, the tier 2, tier 3 cities. So no doubt it's coming. There are already providers there.
Sure. Just to be realistic, if there's an end user who'd like to throw us a light and ask a question, either you've been hearing it or Roshan is around, so what percentage of the work do you feel, as you go further, you would look at co-working, and do you feel at the initial level some concerns? Are there like data security as a concern or something which Jaggi can clear your doubt or something like that?
I think I can talk about BFSI. Right now, what's happening is, while employees want to be more flexible, open, collaborative, regulators are becoming very, very stringent, right? And one such case of wrong happening, everything gets collapsed. I think that's a worry that plays on our mind, and I'm sure that if there are BFSI players, they will probably echo. The word compliance, risk, legal are deadly for us, and no bank, no financial institution today would want to breach any of these things. So if they are taken care, I don't know how, because we ourselves struggle to maintain up to that speed in our own offices. If they are taken care, probably this will become a viable solution. Every office we are trying to look at is how can we minimize office space, how can we make it more flexible without breaching on any of these things. So now this caveat is becoming difficult, and I really don't know whether there is an answer or no.
Yeah, I think that's very critical, and I'd like to answer that, because all these years when we've been providing conventional spaces, there used to be very high audits in terms of access, entry, security, safety, server rack, server hub room control areas. So how do you think you can service those requirements?
Sure. So I think it's important to differentiate between data privacy and physical isolation of people. If you come into a co-working space, any one of us will be able to provide any one of our occupiers with complete data isolation. They're on their own virtual network. Then their data is not exposed to anybody else that's in the space. But that being said, when you come into the space, the employees are actually working in these companies. They don't want to be isolated. They want to be connected with everybody that's around. So the way that we solve that problem is simply to provide sufficient isolation such that they're literally working on their own virtual private network.
So physical security is one part in terms of having your own man-trap doors and all that, access card doors and all that. But network security is something that we take very seriously, and we will give you solutions not only from one lease line service provider, but also to have your own network racks, servers, all of that, separate IT hub room, the entire gamut of services that we can provide, separate VoIP lines, lease lines, PRO lines, all of that.
Kedar, I would just add that it's like a multi-tenanted building, right? They could just create a separate environment for the BFSI. But going back to your point on security, and if you look at the number of banking financial services that outsourced, who are now looking at back-end sourcing because of regulatory reasons, that's another challenge. So obviously the question is, what processes can go into an environment that's co-working versus what's within the control environment. But from a
Great.
security perspective, it's very doable.
Yeah. So great. I think it's been a great session. We just slightly overshot the time, so my apologies. But one key outcome is out of this session is that we all worked hard to increase the market share of the co-working spaces with this last 1 hour. So bill will be sent to Jaggi, Amit, and Siddharth on a co-sharing basis. With that note, I'll end the session, and thank you, everyone.
Thank you very much, gentlemen, for sharing your thoughts and making it such an entertaining session. May I request Mr. Grover to present mementos to our panelists, beginning first with Mr. Siddharth Menda. Mr. Ram Chandnani, Mr. Jaggi Marwaha, Mr. Ashwini Kumar, Mr. Joe Verghese, and Mr. Amit Ramani. May I also request Mr. Verghese to return the compliment and present a memento to Mr. Amit Grover for so ably chairing that session. Thank you very much, gentlemen.